The gunshot echoed through the desert night, and Maribelle knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The acrid smoke from the fire stung her eyes, and the wooden beams of the homestead groaned as they collapsed into flames. She stumbled backward, her dress torn and blackened, hands trembling, slick with her husband's blood. Every nerve screamed for her to run, but her lungs burned and her heart pounded like a war drum in her chest. For years she had endured his cruelty, the bruises, the threats, the nights spent huddled in fear. But tonight, something had snapped. Tonight, she had survived by ending the nightmare herself. The moon hung low in the sky, pale and eerie, casting long, jagged shadows across the desert floor. The wind carried the scent of sage and sand, sharp and dry, stinging her nostrils as she stumbled over the rocks and thorny brush behind the homestead. Somewhere, across the canyon, she glimpsed movement-tall, shadowy figures who watched silently from a distance. Rumors had told of Apache warriors patrolling these lands, feared, respected, and untouchable. Maribelle barely dared to hope they were more than just whispers. She could hear the faint clatter of hooves approaching, a sound that made her stomach twist with both fear and desperate relief. Her body ached and her thoughts raced. She had nowhere to go, no friends, no family willing to shelter a woman who had killed a man, even if it had been in self-defense. The desert was vast, and she was small, but the shadows ahead promised a chance at survival. Maribel's legs carried her across the sand with a frantic energy born of terror. Every step left prints in the soft dust, fleeting evidence that someone had passed this way, someone desperate. She stumbled into a narrow canyon, the walls rising like silent sentinels. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred, but she could not stop, not now. She had crossed the threshold into a world she barely understood, one that promised danger but also, perhaps, freedom. The figures waited at the canyon's edge. At first, she thought they were specters of her exhausted imagination, but as she drew closer, the outline of a man became clear. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his long black hair catching the moonlight, adorned with tribal jewelry that glinted in the shadows. Maribelle froze, torn between fear and the faintest glimmer of hope. The man stepped forward, his movements deliberate, controlled. There was a calmness about him that belied the strength he carried in every muscle, a sense of authority that made the desert itself seem to bend around him. Maribel's heart raced as he spoke, not with words she could understand, but with gestures inviting, patient, and strangely comforting. She did not know if she could trust him, yet instinct told her to follow Dot as she moved toward him. The desert seemed to hold its breath. The fire behind her crackled and roared, smoke curling upward in the moonlight, a reminder of the life she had left in ashes. The fear in her chest was relentless, but so was a small, stubborn spark of hope. For the first time in years, Maribelle felt the possibility of a life that was hers to claim, not a life dictated by fear or abuse. The man Tatanka, she would later learn, guided her across the rocks and sand, his eyes never leaving hers, assessing, protecting, understanding. Every step into the unknown was terrifying, but Maribelle felt a strange comfort in his presence. He did not rush her, did not question her. He simply walked beside her, a silent guardian in the endless desert night, and as they disappeared into the canyon, the homestead reduced to glowing embers behind them, Maribelle realized something terrifying and exhilarating all at once. She was no longer a prisoner. She was a fugitive, yes, but she was alive. And for the first time in years, she could taste freedom. The wind carried the sound of distant howls, and Maribelle shivered not just from cold, but from the thrill of stepping into a life that could very well break her, or save her, depending on what waited in the shadows ahead. The desert night swallowed Maribelle as she stumbled deeper into the canyon, each step heavier than the last. Her lungs burned from running, her dress hung in tatters, and the taste of blood lingered in her mouth. Every instinct screamed that she was exposed, that danger still pursued her. Yet the tall figure waiting ahead brought a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in years. Tatanka-muscular, shirtless, his long black hair catching the moonlight, tribal necklaces and armbands glinting, stood silently, watching her approach. His eyes were sharp, assessing, but not with judgment. Instead, they held something rare, understanding. He did not speak immediately. He simply extended a hand toward her, palm open, a silent offer of guidance. Maribelle hesitated. The desert was merciless, and she had been taught that no stranger could be trusted. Yet the intensity in his gaze, the calm authority in his presence, drew her forward. She grasped his hand, feeling the strength in his grip, and allowed him to lead her across the rocky terrain. Every step was painful, every shadow a potential threat, but Tatanka's presence grounded her in a way she hadn't known she needed. The canyon opened into a wide plateau, and before her lay the Apache village. Tents and huts were arranged in an organized semicircle, smoke curling from cooking fires into the crisp night air. Children laughed quietly in the distance, while warriors moved silently between tents, their bodies taut and ready, eyes alert. The scent of burning sage and roasted meat filled the air, earthy and grounding. Maribelle felt a shiver run through her, a mixture of awe, fear, and hope. Tatanka led her to the edge of the main fire circle, where elders sat in quiet discussion. One older man, his face etched with age and wisdom, rose and approached. Tatanka gestured toward Maribelle. The elder's eyes met hers for a long moment, calm but probing, searching for truth in her expression. Maribelle swallowed hard and nodded, a silent plea for acceptance. The elder spoke softly, in a language Maribelle did not understand, but Tatanka translated gently. "She is running from death, not from crime," he said. "She seeks shelter, not vengeance. She is no threat to us." A murmur ran through the assembled warriors, but the tension did not ease completely. Maribelle realized that even here, in what seemed like sanctuary, she was still an outsider, judged by actions she had taken in desperation. Yet the fact that she was allowed to remain spoke volumes. Tatanka guided her to a small hut near the edge of the village, simple but clean, and gestured for her to rest. Inside, Maribelle sank to the floor, the rough wood biting into her knees. Her hands still shook uncontrollably, and the reality of what she had done pressed down on her like a weight she could not lift. She had survived, yes, but at a cost she could hardly bear to name. And yet, the presence of Tatanka outside the hut, a silent sentinel, offered her a strange comfort. Hours passed, and finally, Tatanka entered the hut. He did not sit immediately. Instead, he knelt, placing a hand on the floor near hers, a gesture of respect and reassurance. He spoke softly, his deep voice carrying a melodic cadence, and though she did not understand all the words, the tone was unmistakable: acceptance, patience, and protection. Maribelle felt tears prick her eyes, the first she had shed in months. Her past life, the years of abuse, the nights of fear, the endless chains of despair flooded her mind. And yet, here in the desert, among people she barely knew, guided by a man whose strength and calm had already saved her, she felt the possibility of something she had long thought impossible: safety. Night deepened, and the stars above the desert glimmered like scattered diamonds. Maribelle lay on a simple mat, listening to the distant crackle of the campfire and the rhythmic breathing of warriors sleeping nearby. The desert was vast, harsh, and untamed, but for the first time, she felt that she might survive within it. Tatanka's hand brushed against the edge of her mat as he stood, a silent signal that he would watch over her through the night. She closed her eyes, exhausted but oddly at peace. Somewhere beyond the firelight, the desert stretched endlessly, full of danger and possibility. And in that vast expanse, Maribelle felt the fragile stirrings of hope, a chance to heal, to belong, and perhaps one day to trust again. Maribelle sat cross-legged on the rough mat inside her small hut, the faint glow of the village fires casting dancing shadows across the walls. She could hear the distant laughter of children and the low murmur of warriors, their presence a constant reminder that she was no longer alone. Yet inside, her heart felt heavy, burdened by the secrets she had carried for so long. Tatanka remained just outside, leaning against the doorway, his muscular, shirtless frame outlined by the flickering firelight. His long black hair moved slightly in the evening breeze, and the tribal jewelry he wore glinted with each subtle motion. Maribelle had begun to feel a strange comfort in his presence, an unspoken assurance that she could speak freely, that she would not be judged. Her hands shook as she clasped them together. I killed him," she whispered, her voice cracking. The words felt like stones dropping into an endless pit, heavy and irreversible. I couldn't take it anymore. The years of abuse, the threats, the pain. I didn't mean to, but I had to. Tatanka's expression softened. He did not move closer, did not offer advice or judgment. Instead, he simply nodded, letting her words hang in the air, carrying them away without condemnation. There was no rush, no expectation, only patience, the kind that felt foreign and necessary all at once. Maribelle continued, the story tumbling from her lips like a river breaking through a dam. She spoke of the bruises that never healed, the nights spent hiding under blankets, the way fear had dictated every step of her life. Her voice rose and fell with each memory, tears streaking through the desert dust on her cheeks. I never thought I'd be free. Until tonight, she admitted, shivering at both the confession and the lingering cold in the desert night. Tatanka finally stepped forward, kneeling beside her without touching, his dark eyes holding hers. "You survived," he said softly, his deep voice carrying strength and warmth. "And that is not weakness." Maribelle blinked at him, confusion mingling with relief. "But I don't know who I am anymore. How can I live like this? How can I forgive myself?" Tatanka looked toward the village, where the smoke rose lazily into the star-filled sky. "The past does not define you," he said. "It is what you do now in this moment that shapes your path. You are here. You are alive. You have the chance to choose." She swallowed hard, the words settling into the hollow spaces of her heart. For the first time, she realized that she had not only fled a life of terror, but had stepped into one of possibility, a plidia fado, life where survival could lead to healing, where fear could be replaced with trust. Hours passed in quiet conversation. Tatanka listened as she spoke, asking gentle questions when appropriate, never pressing her beyond what she could bear. Slowly, Maribelle began to feel the weight on her chest lift, replaced by something she had not felt in years, relief, and a fragile sense of belonging. Finally, exhausted from both the confession and the emotional release, she leaned back against the wall of the hut. The sounds of the village at night, a baby's cry, the crackling of fire, the whisper of wind over sand lulled her toward sleep. Tatanka remained outside, a silent guardian, his presence reassuring even without words. As her eyes closed, Maribelle understood something profound. Trust was not instantaneous. It was earned slowly, quietly, through actions and patience. Tatanka had shown her that simply by being present, by offering guidance and protection without demanding anything in return. In a world that had only ever shown her cruelty, this was a revelation she could not ignore. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself a single, trembling hope that one day she might feel whole again, that she might live free not just in body, but in heart, outside. The desert stretched endlessly under a sky scattered with stars. Somewhere in that vastness, danger and possibility coexisted, waiting for her. But for now, in this small Apache village, surrounded by people she barely knew but who had chosen to accept her, Maribelle allowed herself a moment of peace. She had survived the worst of the night, confessed the truth that had haunted her, and discovered that courage could exist in quiet moments, not just in acts of violence. And as the desert winds whispered through the village, carrying with them both the past and the promise of a future, Maribelle felt for the first time in her life that she might truly belong somewhere. Morning broke over the desert, painting the Apache village in warm amber light. Maribelle stirred on the rough mat, her body stiff but her mind awake with both fear and anticipation. The events of the night before played over in her head, her confession, Tatanka's calm presence, and the quiet reassurance that she was not alone. For the first time in years, she felt the faintest flicker of hope. Tatanka appeared at the doorway, shirtless as ever, his muscular frame bathed in sunlight. Long black hair framed his intense face, and the tribal necklaces and armbands he wore glinted in the morning light. He gestured for her to follow, not with words, but with a fluid, commanding motion that left no room for argument. Maribelle rose slowly, brushing dust from her torn dress, and stepped into the morning warmth. The desert air was crisp and dry, filled with the scent of sage and distant campfires. Tatanka led her beyond the huts, toward the edge of the plateau where the land dropped into jagged canyons. Here, the Apache warriors trained, and Tatanka began teaching her the ways of the desert. He showed her how to read animal tracks in the sand, how to distinguish signs of approaching storms, and how to move quietly over rocky terrain. Each lesson was patient, deliberate, and unhurried, but Maribelle felt the weight of her own inexperience pressing against her. At first, she stumbled constantly. Her hands fumbled over tools, her steps slipped on loose stones, and the desert sun scorched her skin. Tatanka did not scold her. Instead, he adjusted her stance, demonstrated again, and waited. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to improve. She tracked a rabbit through the scrub, her heart racing with triumph. She listened to the wind, noting its direction and strength. The desert, once alien and threatening, began to feel alive, almost friendly. Days passed in this rhythm. Maribelle woke with the sun, trained with Tatanka, and returned to the village to observe the daily life of the Apache people. She learned to prepare simple meals over open fires, to help the children with chores, and to respect the silent rules of the warrior's code. The village elders watched her progress, sometimes approvingly, sometimes skeptically, but Tatanka's presence always shielded her from undue scrutiny. During these long days, Maribelle noticed small changes in herself. Her fear no longer controlled her. It was tempered by skill and knowledge. She began to trust her instincts again, and with each successful step, her confidence grew. And always, Tatanka was there, a silent observer, a teacher, a protector. When their hands brushed during a demonstration, when he corrected her stance, when he simply stood near her watching the horizon, she felt a strange warmth, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper she had yet to name. One evening, after a long day of tracking and practicing with a bow, Maribelle and Tatanka rested at the canyon's edge. The sky was painted with fiery oranges and deep purples, the desert glowing in the dying light. She gazed at the vast expanse before her, feeling both small and infinitely alive. "I never knew the desert could feel like this," she said softly. Tatanka's dark eyes met hers, calm and unwavering. "The desert is not just a place," he said. "It is a teacher. It shows you strength, patience, and respect. It tests you, but it also rewards those willing to listen." Maribelle nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. She realized that this was more than survival. This was transformation. She had fled death, but she was learning to live and to trust. As night fell, the village settled into quiet routine. Fires glowed, children slept, and warriors kept watch. Maribelle lay under a blanket, her muscles sore but her spirit lighter than it had been in years. For the first time since leaving her old life behind, she allowed herself to imagine a future not just of survival, but of belonging. And somewhere in the shadows, Tatanka remained vigilant, his presence a steady reminder that even in a harsh, unforgiving land, trust and loyalty could be found, and courage could grow in the hearts of those brave enough to embrace it. Maribelle woke before dawn, the desert cold biting at her skin despite the blanket Tatanka had placed over her shoulders. The village was quiet, the only sounds the distant calls of birds and the faint rustle of tents as the Apache stirred. She stretched, muscles sore from days of training and constant vigilance, and stepped outside. The plateau stretched endlessly before her, painted in pale blues and grays under the pre-dawn light. She had begun to feel a fragile sense of peace in the village, but it was short-lived. Across the canyon, she noticed a thin column of smoke rising unnaturally from the horizon, smoke that was not from the village fires. Her heart clenched. She squinted, trying to make out shapes in the dim light. The dust cloud approached fast, kicking up sand and debris. Settlers' wagons, led by a man she recognized immediately, her husband's vengeful brother, were heading straight for the Apache village. Maribel's stomach twisted. They had discovered her escape. They would drag her back, or worse, attack the people who had given her sanctuary. Panic clawed at her throat, but she forced herself to breathe, to focus. Tatanka appeared beside her without a sound, muscular and shirtless as ever, his long black hair flowing in the wind, tribal jewelry glinting in the dawnlight. His eyes, dark and intense, met hers with unspoken understanding. "They are coming," she whispered. Tatanka nodded, his jaw set. "We will protect the village. You must stay close." His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge of steel beneath the reassurance. Maribel's fear did not ease, but the knowledge that he would not let harm come to her strengthened her resolve. The villagers quickly mobilized. Warriors gathered weapons, their movements precise and practiced. Children were led to safe areas, and elders coordinated quietly, their calm presence a stark contrast to the tension that gripped the younger fighters. Maribelle grabbed a rifle she had begun learning to use under Tatanka's patient instruction. Her hands were steady despite the adrenaline pounding through her veins. The settlers emerged from the canyon, shouting orders and whipping their horses into a frenzy. Dust swirled around their wagons, creating a haze that glimmered in the early morning sun. Maribel's stomach knotted as she realized the full scope of the threat. They were not merely coming for her. They intended to challenge the entire village. Tatanka moved beside her, muscles taut, eyes scanning the horizon. He issued silent commands, gesturing to the warriors, positioning them strategically along ridges and behind natural cover. Maribelle followed his lead, finding a spot with a clear line of sight, her rifle poised but her mind racing with doubt and fear. She had fled one danger, only to face another, and the weight of her choices pressed heavily upon her dot as the settlers charged forward. The first arrows flew, whistling through the air. Maribel's hand shook, but she took careful aim, firing at a wagon wheel, causing it to tilt and slow the advance. Around her, the warriors moved like shadows, striking with precision and skill. Tatanka leapt to intercept a man attempting to flank them, his strength and agility unmatched, the sunlight glinting off his tribal jewelry as he fought with a combination of raw power and practiced technique. Amid the chaos, Maribelle felt a strange calm. Fear was still there, but so was resolve. She realized that she could not run this time. She had found a place, a people, and a man who had shown her trust and protection. If she was going to survive, she would have to fight, not just for herself, but for them. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. Dust choked the air, the cries of men and horses filled the canyon, and the clash of wood and metal echoed across the rocks. Yet gradually, the settlers' momentum faltered. Tatanka and his warriors, fierce and unyielding, repelled the attackers. The settlers began to retreat, defeated and humiliated, leaving the desert dust to settle in silence once more. Breathless and exhausted, Maribelle lowered her rifle, her body trembling with adrenaline and relief. Tatanka came to her side, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. His presence was steady, grounding her as the village assessed the aftermath. Maribelle realized that her actions, her survival, and her presence had brought both danger and strength to this community. And as the desert sun rose higher, painting the plateau in gold, she understood a harsh truth. Freedom came with cost, but courage and trust could grow even in the face of returning threats. The sun had barely risen when the battle erupted. Dust swirled around the Apache village as settlers' wagons barreled down the plateau, shouting and whipping their horses into frenzy. Maribelle's chest tightened, but she gripped her rifle, her fingers steady despite the pounding of her heart. She had fled one life of fear only to find herself on the front lines of another. Tatanka, muscular and shirtless as ever, moved like a shadow among the warriors. His long black hair whipped in the wind, tribal jewelry catching glints of sunlight as he fought. Every motion was precise, powerful, and terrifying to watch. Maribelle felt a mixture of awe and fear. This man, who had saved her, was also capable of extraordinary violence in defense of his people. Stay low. Don't fire until you have a clear shot. Tatanka barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. He dove behind a rock to intercept a settler attempting to flank the village. Maribelle followed his advice, her eyes scanning for targets while keeping her body low against the rocks. The settlers were relentless, their shouts mixing with the cries of horses and the clang of metal. She took a steadying breath and aimed at a wagon wheel, firing. The wood splintered, sending the wagon tipping sideways and throwing its driver to the ground. Maribelle's pulse raced, adrenaline fueling her every action. Around her, the warriors moved like coordinated shadows, striking with precision, their bodies blending into the desert landscape. Tatanka reappeared near her, brushing past her reposition. "You're doing well," he said, his tone low but audible. She caught the rare warmth in his voice, a fleeting comfort amidst the chaos. His eyes never left hers, silently guiding, silently protecting. Hours passed in a haze of dust, smoke, and relentless motion. Maribelle fired again and again, each shot finding its mark, each movement taut and steady from days of practice. She felt the rhythm of the battle, a terrifying, intoxicating cadence that pulled her forward despite fear. And all the while, Tatanka fought beside her, his movements a blend of raw strength and disciplined skill. A settler broke through a line of warriors, advancing toward the village's main fire circle. Tatanka intercepted him with a roar, his powerful arms twisting the man's weapon away and sending him sprawling into the dust. Maribelle watched, her breath catching, the sight both horrifying and awe-inspiring. She realized in that instant that this man Tatanka was not just her protector, but also a symbol of everything the Apache warriors stood for: strength, courage, and unshakable loyalty. Amid the chaos, Maribelle felt a surge of resolve. She was no longer the frightened woman fleeing her past. She was part of something larger, fighting not just for herself, but for a community that had welcomed her when no one else would. Every arrow she dodged, every shot she fired, every step she took beside the warriors reinforced her place in this new life. Finally, as the sun climbed higher, the settlers faltered. Their momentum broke, their lines fractured, and the relentless precision of the Apache warriors forced them into retreat. Dust hung in the air like a curtain as the attackers withdrew, leaving the village battered but victorious. Breathing heavily, Maribelle lowered her rifle and sank to the ground. Her body trembled from exhaustion, her hands scraped and blistered, but a sense of pride and relief surged through her. She had survived not just the settlers' assault, but the emotional storm of trusting again. Tatanka came to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You fought well," he said, voice steady, eyes soft but alert. "You are part of this now." Maribelle looked up at him, seeing the calm beneath the storm of his expression, the unspoken respect and acceptance. As the village assessed the damage intended to the wounded, Maribelle realized the truth of her journey. She had fled death, confessed her darkest secrets, learned the ways of the desert, and now stood amidst survival and victory. The desert was harsh and unforgiving, but it had also become a place of belonging, courage, and unexpected strength. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope not for a return to the past she had fled, but for a future she could face with strength, skill, and the steadfast presence of Tatanka by her side. The desert morning was quiet, the kind of calm that comes only after a storm. Maribelle stepped outside her hut, the cool wind brushing against her skin and tousling her hair. The village had survived the attack, and for the first time she allowed herself to breathe fully. The fires of the previous night still smoldered in a few spots, but the Apache warriors had already begun repairs, their movements calm and precise, like the desert itself was part of them. Tatanka appeared beside her, muscular and shirtless, long black hair catching the sunlight, tribal jewelry glinting on his neck and arms. He did not speak immediately, only stood there, silent and imposing, yet protective. Maribelle glanced at him and felt a wave of gratitude. Without this man, without the village, she might not have survived not just the attack, but the long years of fear that had led her here. "Are you ready?" he finally asked, his deep voice low but firm. Maribelle nodded, though the knots of uncertainty still lingered in her stomach. She had spent days learning to track, hunt, and survive in the desert. She had faced fear and death, and each time Tatanka had been there, guiding her, protecting her, teaching her that courage was more than brute strength. It was endurance, patience, and trust. They walked toward the canyon edge, where the village overlooked the vast desert. Maribelle marveled at the endless expanse, jagged rocks, distant mesas, and the sweeping sand stretching to the horizon. It was harsh, unyielding, yet beautiful in its raw simplicity. And it was hers, now not hers in ownership, but in belonging. Tatanka gestured toward the horizon, then back to her. She understood without words. The desert was not just a place of danger. It was a place of freedom, of life reclaimed. Maribelle took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her past lift slightly with each gust of wind. She had fled death, confessed her sins, survived training, and fought alongside warriors. Now, she could choose her own path. As they returned to the village, children ran past, laughing, their innocence a sharp contrast to the horrors of the past week. Elders offered quiet nods of acknowledgement, a recognition of her courage and her integration into their world. She realized that this was more than survival. This was acceptance. Tatanka led her to a small fire where some of the warriors gathered. He introduced her not with words alone, but through gestures, showing that she was part of the community. Maribelle felt a warmth bloom in her chest, a sense of being seen and respected. For the first time since leaving her old life, she felt hope, not naive hope, but a deep, grounded certainty that she could endure, thrive, and belong. That night, as the village settled, Maribelle sat beside Tatanka at the edge of the plateau. The stars stretched infinitely overhead, cold and bright, yet comforting in their constancy. She spoke softly, telling him fragments of her dreams for the future, not a life dictated by fear, but one guided by courage and trust. Tatanka listened, silent but attentive, his presence steady and unwavering. "You are no longer running," he said finally, his voice carrying across the desert night. "You have survived. You have fought. And you have chosen this life." Maribelle nodded, tears prickling her eyes, not of fear, but of release. She had chosen, yes, but more importantly, she had survived. She had found strength she did not know existed, and she had discovered the bonds of trust, loyalty, and protection. The desert around them was silent now, the aftermath of battle giving way to calm. In that stillness, Maribelle understood something profound. Freedom was not just the absence of danger, it was the presence of trust, courage, and belonging. And in Tatanka, in the village, she had found all three. As dawn broke over the plateau, bathing the desert in gold, Maribelle took a deep breath. The horizon stretched endlessly before her, full of danger, possibility, and promise. She would never forget the past, but she no longer feared it. The life she had reclaimed was hers to shape, and with Tatanka by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. For the first time, Maribelle truly felt alive, free in body, mind, and spirit. And in the vast, unforgiving desert, surrounded by a community that had accepted her, she finally found peace.